crises are opportunities. They are always opportunities for big change.
Welcome to Manufacturing Happy Hour, the podcast where we get real about the latest trends and technologies impacting modern manufacturers.
Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Each week, we interview industry experts that are at the top of their craft and give you the tools, tactics and strategies you need to take your career and your business to the next level. And now, your host, Chris Lukey.
Hey, welcome to episode 59. Today we're talking about how to maintain and enhance company culture in the face of change. We're actually going to be throwing it back. We're talking to Dan Voit, who was our guest on episode 1 of the podcast. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, definitely recommend going back to check it out. It's not necessarily required pre-listening, but if you want to learn about his company, Blentech, certainly consider listening to episode 1. It's a great episode about company culture in general. But today's episode is really about how company culture can evolve in the face of hybrid work models and new collaborative technologies. So, the 3 things you can expect from today's episode are largely based around 3 initiatives that Dan and his team at Blentech put together near the start of the pandemic. We're going to be talking about internal collaboration tools, PLM, ERPs, things that allow his team to work together. Second, we're going to talk about external factors like cloud solutions that allow him and his team to do work for their clients remotely while having all the support of their organization behind them. And finally, we're going to talk directly about hybrid work models and how they've seen that impact the work culture at Blentech. So, big episode today. If you're enjoying this episode or any other episodes you've listened to before of Manufacturing Happy Hour, make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. You can get there by going to manufacturinghappyhour.com/iTunes. It'll take you straight to that platform, and those reviews really do give us valuable feedback on what we should be featuring on the show, and it also helps get the show in the ears of more potential listeners. So, manufacturinghappyhour.com/iTunes, but let's not waste any more time on this intro. It's time to get you reintroduced to Dan Voit. All right, today we have our first returning guest to the podcast. Dan Voit is the CEO of Blentech, a Bay Area-based food technology company specializing in equipment, systems, and software for the safe, nutritious, and consistent preparation of food. Last time Dan was on the show, we talked about what it takes to create a strong culture within a manufacturing company, and today we're taking that a step further, discussing what this looks like when you move to a hybrid work model and how technology plays a part. With that, Dan, welcome back to Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be back. It's great. And we're doing this one with a hybrid remote model too, because last time we were in the same room, and here we are walking the walk, Chris. So I think that's cool.
That's the most meta way you could have put it. And for those of you not watching the video, this is the first ever hotel edition. I'm recording this from my hotel room at Podcast Movement in Nashville, Tennessee. So yes, it couldn't be more appropriate for the way we're doing this today. So yeah. and with any start of an interview, I have to ask, Dan, it's just over 2 years since you were first on the show. I think it was like July 12th, 2019 was the date we recorded the first episode. And we're doing this here at the start of August in 2021. And obviously, a lot has changed during that time, but you're an outdoorsman. You're very active. What have you been doing to stay sane and active over the past couple years?
Well, yeah, staying sane and active for all of us has been, the key to getting through the last couple of years, right? Yeah, I've gotten more focused on trail running in the last few years. You may recall from before, I spent a lot of time doing CrossFit. I had a CrossFit gym, owned it. But I think with the remote work that we've been doing over the last few years, I was looking for reasons to get outside, just be around nature and, reconnect in that way. So lots of trail running, lots of backpacking, and that's kept me sane, but it's also been a good opportunity to reconnect with family, and reconnect with your own personal passion and focus. So, feeling really good about where I'm going, where our company's going, and finding ways to make something positive out of an otherwise hard situation.
Yeah, I'm a backpacker as well. I haven't done as much of that recently. I've still been getting outdoors, still been certainly doing more running. I finally got Strava during the pandemic to like track my runs. So that's like a little more motivating. Now I've got some insight into my pace, but paddleboarding is my new thing that I added
That's
to the
awesome.
arsenal. Well,
That
I
is
now like since our last interview, I moved to Milwaukee. So, but now I live 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. So I've got a nice spot to jump right in and get on the board now. So, but Dan, I know you and I could talk activities all day long, but now that you're back, I want to we want to talk technology. We want to talk hybrid work models and how this all goes together. But let's backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to our first episode that we did. Because I want to talk about your business first a little bit, because one line that stuck out that I think would be really interesting for our audience is that you said, hey, people got to eat, regardless of what's going on in the world, like people are still going to consume food. But with the pandemic and people buying more groceries and things like that, less restaurants and things along those lines, I'm curious, did you see that change your business or the demand that was being requested in terms of how people are producing food?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I think that, a lot of our industrial systems have been really tested both during the start of the pandemic, in the middle of it, as well as in the wake of it. And I mean, everybody's hearing stories about supply chain disruptions and, what effects that might have on prices, whether or not it's inflation, that type of thing. I think the food industry came out of what we've been experiencing, with an A plus. The store shelves, they got low, but they never went empty. And for the most part, the industry as a whole was able to rise to the challenge and give people what they need. It wasn't without its struggles for everyone, but it was accomplished. But I think from on our business perspective, us specifically, what we saw was the immediate shift of what was about a 30-year trend. Over the last 30 years, there's been an incremental and steady march towards food service. So what do I mean? It's casual quick dining. It's the chain restaurants or that you might go to while you're traveling, or when you're at lunch, your lunch break, you might pop down to one of the major chains and say, hey, I'm gonna have a soup, I'm gonna have a sandwich, I'm gonna have a taco, a burrito. And a lot of those folks in the short term, they saw a decline in output. But then the ones that were able to adapt using mobile order, really tying into the delivery systems, like the DoorDash type services, those types. I think then they started to see a rise. So there are some companies, that sell your outlet where they were selling the products where they saw a decline and then a rise. There's some that saw a rise and there's some that saw a decline. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a total reshifting of the dynamic and who's producing and who isn't. There was a downturn in production of certain types of foods, but for everything that went down, something else went up. And so, all in, Blentech is still kicking strong and producing equipment and servicing the need. And, we're full up in the shop now and for the foreseeable future. So all in, that's pretty good.
Well, I know you're an expert in food, and no doubt you are going to find ways to evolve and continue to serve your customers. And I know you had 3 initiatives going into all this. We're not going to get to those quite yet. 3 initiatives that you had, throughout the pandemic that evolved. But, in addition to being one of our food experts, you're also becoming one of our culture experts on the show now that we're here to have another conversation on it, because you do such a tremendous job leading and motivating your team at Blentech. And for those of you listening, I know a lot of our audience are longtime listeners. Dan was on episode 1. So if you haven't listened to that yet, definitely recommend go back and check that out. But I've got a very basic question to really get into the meat of the conversation. And that's, how has your philosophy around culture evolved over the past 2 years?
Well, it's highlighted to me the importance of really building relationships between team members, leaders and team members, between team members. I think it's in, is it the Harvard Business Review is kind of calling 2021 and 2022 the Great Resignation. If you've seen those stats where, they're saying something like 40% of millennials are looking to leave their job and move on. And, Blentech isn't experiencing anywhere near the degree of volatility in that market or in that aspect that many others in the market are. It's not to say we're experiencing none, but everybody has some. What we find here is that people, want to feel fulfilled in their jobs. They want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they're working towards a purpose that's meaningful, and they want to know that their work has a genuine impact. And the truth is, it does, no matter what your job is. But sometimes in some work environments, leaders can give the impression to an employee that, hey, you're just a number, you're expendable. And what does that do? I mean, that just demotivates an individual. So you have to work a little harder when you have a hybrid remote work environment, and be more deliberate about relationship building with folks. And if you're not able to do that, then you're not going to have that degree of connectivity. You're not going to have that degree of trust that you need to be able to navigate the really hard problems. If you're working asynchronously, remotely, you got to just trust that they're going to do it. And that trust, it's not something that comes easy. So I think that's, am I answering your question?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dan, you're always answering my questions. Like, no, that was good. I like that you bring up being more deliberate with your relationships. I do have a follow-up question to this, and this might be the last time I refer back to our first interview, but one of the most powerful things that jumped out in that conversation was, as a leader, when it comes to setting culture, you need to model the behaviors you want to see in the culture. So how do you do that when you're remote?
Oh boy, it's lots of little things. You need to pick up the phone and call people. You need to allow a little bit of time for some actual conversation aside from what are we here to do. And more recently with the remote hybrid, you need to architect opportunities to collaborate, sometimes in person, sometimes remotely. And have that flexibility. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more later. I don't think that gimmicky games and things to kind of say, hey, let's get on and play one of those online games together. I don't think that necessarily works. But if you're genuinely asking people how they're doing, you're taking some time to have those one-to-one conversations with people. Then I believe that really strengthens those bonds.
Well, I love that you bring up just picking up the phone and calling people, because, we have all these cool collaboration tools right now. We're going to talk about them coming up here in a second. There's no doubt that they add value to it, but I feel like sometimes we miss the basics in that regard.
Right.
And your earlier answer about relationships really highlights that as well. But, we are getting to the meat of the conversation now, and I'll kind of kick things off, but I'd love you to add a bit more color to this. So when you first reached out to me about saying, hey, maybe we should do another episode, you outlined 3 initiatives that you had. And just to summarize those really quickly, 3 things that you did with the pandemic, not only internally, but externally, is one, I understand that internally you have a really integrated single source of truth with your ERP and PLM systems that allow internally for you to function well. Number 2, you expanded your IoT platform, which is called Cooker Cloud, for remote commissioning and things that would make a lot of sense in a social distancing world. Then finally, the 3rd initiative was that you launched a hybrid work model. I'm curious, the first basic question I have around this is, how did you come up with these initiatives, and maybe can you provide a bit more color to each of them before we deep dive into all 3?
Well, I think to an extent we had elements of these things already incubating going into this, meaning we had started aspects of it. The IoT platform, I think we talked a little bit about it last time, but that's an initiative we started back in 2015, 2016. It's a patented data contextualization engine that we were going to build for our Cooker Cloud system. And we actually, back in 2016, we trademarked the phrase "stay close even at a distance," which I think is I don't know, frighteningly useful now. And it was the same with the cloud-based collaboration software, the internal systems, was, looking at where things were headed and looking at what was occurring. It was really a question of saying, hey, what technologies are already developed on the market? What can we move into really, really quickly that we know is going to give us a permanent advantage as soon as those lockdowns began. The remote hybrid work model, I don't think we were having genuine conversations about that until about 1 to 2 quarters into the pandemic effects, because there really was too much uncertainty. So I'd love to tell you that I had a crystal ball and I had these 3 and I did them on March 1st or 2020. And that's just totally not true. No, we did lay down one principle, because we weren't able to move everybody to remote, right? You can't weld remotely. And so there are certain people that had to come in because their job needed to be done on site. So from the beginning, we did have to maintain a hybrid model, but we wrote down a principle more than a policy. And that principle was, you're eligible for remote work provided your remoteness doesn't add an undue burden to anyone else. So if you being remote increases the workload for somebody else, then it probably isn't a good remote job. But if you're able to find ways to deliberately design your work and your activity so that you're net neutral or net positive, then frankly speaking, it's a no-brainer. On the initiative one side, the systems, we had already started our process of building out cloud-based collaboration systems with the PLM on Salesforce.com. Right. And come April 1st, 2020, the leadership and our team got together and we said, hey, look, we don't know when this is going to end. And back then, if you remember, they were saying 2 weeks to flatten the curve, which is that's aged like milk, right? Right. So we were looking at that saying, really? I don't know about that. And so we put the pedal to the metal on implementing the remainder of the PLM and expediting the ERP portion of it, setting a 6-month timeline instead of a 12 to 24-month timeline to implement it. So we opted to do it in half the time, which I think was the bold and wise choice in that case.
Yeah. Let's focus on initiative number 1 real fast, because one thing I'd love manufacturing leaders to take away from this episode is, how do I implement these things in my business a little bit, or how should I be thinking about these type of things? Because I remember having the PLM conversation with you long before the pandemic started. Like these, like you said, these weren't things that just came out of thin air, like come March 2020. A number of these things you'd been working on before that. So,
absolutely,
let's talk about how, this single source of truth that you have with your PLM platform. I think you use Salesforce for it, as I understand it, and that's part of the solution. But what does this do for your team? What are the results people see from having a system like this, maybe in the context of a story or how it functions at Blentech?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So it's on the Salesforce platform. It's actually a software called Propel, and the ERP side is a software called Rootstock. And since they're all Salesforce, they're all Salesforce native. You could stitch them together in a really good way. What does it give you? Anyone can access the most up-to-date information about any critical activity within the company in real time. That's what that means. You don't have to call somebody to request something. You don't have to go into the office and check it to know where it's at. And it gives you the ability to build much more productive workflows, because you can create triggers and checks around activities that would otherwise be in different systems. So, for example, you could say, well, if some invoice isn't received on some period of time, or some invoice isn't sent, then you could have something happen on an opportunity somewhere else. Maybe if you had a customer who wasn't paying and you were about to quote them something new, maybe those systems are connected and say,
yeah,
hey, this might be a problem. Or maybe you have a service case occurring, and you want to let somebody else know that some other object that might be, or activity that might be interrelated to that. Hey, before you design that thing, we're seeing a case over here and they're related. So we're starting to build up those types of integrations as they arise and integrate the workflow. What I'm seeing overall is a kind of a de-departmentalization. That's a kind of a huge word that I just made up. But rather than saying, hey, this department is going to transfer it to that department, and then this department is going to do its thing and then transfer it to this department. Functional experts are coming together to define the specific activities, irrespective of which department they're in. And, and it's more about how do you reduce the number of steps, and how do you reduce the error rate and increase the overall velocity of the company. So I wandered a little away from your central question, but the immediate benefits that we're seeing, we've been able to get our engineering output to about 300% in the last quarter to where it was at the start of the year. And so far, from a business perspective, what we're seeing is we've been able to offer some lead times to our customers that might be, in some cases, half of what our competitors are doing, from what we're being told. And you don't always know how accurate that data is, but that's a pretty big deal. And in a time where lots of folks are saying, oh man, supply chain is steamrolling me, I can't get this widget or that widget, so I can't ship. That's not to say that we're immune to that, but we're able to collaborate and creatively find solutions to those things. Like, oh shoot, this component isn't available. What are some quick cut substitutions? And we can have those collaborations at a moment's notice across the entire platform, and still get those jobs to flow.
Let's talk adoption with this as well, because the one thing that jumps out in my mind, because I know the power of having a great tech stack like that and having all these tools that work together. How do you get your engineering team, your sales team, your team overall in general to start adopting these systems versus just defaulting to email or jumping on Slack or whatever it is? How do you get them to start really using this so that the power of these collaboration tools come to life? Because if I'm a manufacturing leader, that's probably the question in my mind. It's like, great, now we have all these systems, but how do I, motivate change to get people to start making it a habit?
Yeah, there are so many different facets to tackling that problem, and that there's not a one silver bullet thing that I can say. But I will say, as an overarching principle, management leadership, executive leadership can never weaponize the platform. If you weaponize the platform and use the data for kind of controlling people rather than inspiring people, you're gonna lose their trust, and they're not going to invest in the system. I'm pretty inspired by the book Power of Habit. I don't know if we talked about it last time. I think we did. I'll bring it up again. I think that if somebody is invested in Slack, or they're invested in email, they're really just caught up in habits. And so it's about creating and sustaining new habits. So you have to be consistent with your message. You have to be supportive. You're gonna have to revisit implementation 7-10 times with people, and you're gonna have to have that patience. Maybe it's a little like starting a new diet. It's a little like starting a new workout plan. And to me, I know last time, before, I talked a little bit about the corollaries between running a business and running a gym. I think those are still totally salient. They're still on point today. Finding and sustaining those habits and making them stick. So I guess in practice, we've been tackling, one element at a time, pulling together cross-functional teams, having creative collaboration sessions, very, very quickly iterating and building the workflows and processes together. And just a continuous push for transference of activity into the single source of truth. We're not 100% into it on day one, nor did we intend to be, because there really wasn't any one person in the company who knew how every single thing worked down to the button click. So you really can't go into it that way. Trying to think if there's anything I'm missing on this front, but I think that pretty much. You know what? There is one more thing I wanted to cover on it, and that is that when people are when the world is in a state of crisis or turbulence, everything that was the habits and patterns that they're kind of already thrown out, right?
True.
So what better time to develop and sustain new habits than in an otherwise moment of change? I mean, you've already had your world rocked. It's already been kind of knocked sideways. And so it's in those moments where you can step in and say, hey, what was isn't anymore. So let's come together and make a better, a new and better, paradigm that we can live within for a period of time. I mean, it's, I think it was the former advisor to, or the advisor to President Barack Obama years ago, Rahm Emanuel, said something along the lines of never let a crisis go to waste. Crises are opportunities. They are always opportunities for big change. And I think they're the moment where people can finally say, hey, Zoom meetings work, remote work works, new technologies can function, because you're in that moment where you need to try something new and it's got to work and everyone's open to it. So if you've already laid some of the groundwork and you move into one of those situations, that's probably the time to tighten up the timeline, do it a little bit quicker, because everyone's going to be ready, they're going to be excited, and they're going to benefit from it.
Excellent points. I'm glad you brought that one up at the end, because I think now we can accredit part of that quote to you. I know you paraphrased it enough to, I think we can have Dan as the crises are opportunities quote. So no, I'm glad you brought that back around. But also for those listening, Power of Habit is a great book. I mean, I think in general, it's at the end of the day, it's habits, right? Like, and I think you brought up a great point where when there's an issue that's already going to cause a big change in our lives, like, that's what a perfect time to develop new habits. So I love the detail we got into on your first initiative.
We'll be right back right after a word from our sponsor. If you're an equipment manufacturer, distributor, or dealer of industrial equipment and you're looking to accelerate your profits through online sales, you're going to want to get to know this week's sponsor. Gen Alpha Technologies makes it easier for companies like you to do business through one of the most robust e-commerce platforms for the B2B industrial world. Let's be honest, a lot of manufacturers are still looking for ways to increase market share. They want to deliver a better, an exceptional level of customer service, and they are still looking to execute a digital transformation that's powered by e-commerce. Gen Alpha can be your partner that helps you accomplish all of these things. What I love about Gen Alpha is that, unlike other e-commerce providers, the team over at Gen Alpha has been in your shoes. They've lived and breathed manufacturing and heavy industry. They ask the difficult and necessary questions because they know the questions to ask. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to head to manufacturinghappyhour.com/Gen Alpha to listen to our interview with their president and COO, Christina Harrington. There, you can find a direct link to their e-commerce readiness assessment, or you can check them out for yourself at genalpha.com. Gen Alpha understands firsthand the promise that manufacturers have to fulfill when helping their customers keep equipment running. That's why they're not only your software provider, but also your business partner. That's Gen Alpha Technologies. And now, back to today's episode.
talk about the second initiative that you have as well, because this one's more external. You evolved your solution offering to your customers. You've had a long time IoT platform called Cooker Cloud, and I know that has evolved, and I'd love you to add some more color to that. But fill us in on this one and what it's done for your company as well.
Yeah, I mean, we started off an IoT platform that, again, we called it the Cooker Cloud. It's a framework that it's very secure with a remote recipe management structure. So you can program how you cook the food on your phone, and you can push it to a machine, and then the data can be stored. It's stored in a historian, and that's neat, but it's not special. I mean, I'll be honest, and you worked in the automation world for a long time, so that's not special. But what is special about what we've done is we tailored it to the food market. Number one. Number two, we built a food-focused contextualization engine. So what that means is you can build recipes with a very deliberate structure, and you get automatically created reports that are built for how a food business works. Now, we started off thinking, and actually you mentioned Strava, so I'm going to tell you that when I first started thinking about it, I had already just gotten into Strava. Did you know that? Is that why you mentioned Strava?
No, I didn't actually. I just assumed you used it also.
I totally do. Right.
Yeah.
But what was happening is I had just gone to a customer site, and I was trying to help them solve a cooking problem. And I looked at a graph of the temperature, and because we graphed out the data and we wanted to make sure the food was cooked. And then I went for a run, and I was hit the analysis button on my Strava. So I wanted to see, and I saw my heart rate graph, and I saw my speed graph, my elevation graph, and I thought, that looks a lot like a temperature curve. And then I looked at kind of like how they were able to have contextualization. Like Strava breaks up your runs into segments. They'll say, oh, hey, you've ran this segment, 10 times. So you're faster or slower than you usually are. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right.
Yep.
So I was thinking, man, automatic contextualization is automated insights. And so if you can automate insights, in reality that's really the key. That's what people need. So we built contextualization engines that provided automated insights. And then, we first applied it to cookers, but we immediately started saying, man, we can do some of this on our continuous cooking systems. So we got batch cookers and continuous cookers, but we can also use it on mixing systems, cryogenic systems, and vacuum systems. And there's a lot changing in the food business. It's not just this shift for who's in the office, who isn't, restaurants. That is one seismic shift that's happening. The other seismic shift that's happening is people are paying attention to the sustainability or the ecological impact of their foods. In some cases, they're worried about where their proteins come from. You're seeing the rise of the plant-based protein world, and you're seeing other new technologies need to be deployed to reduce efficiency. Increase efficiency, reduce overhead, to just lower your global footprint, increase your profitability or your costs. And we thought, man, we can apply this contextualization engine across our whole platform. So we're launching a modified contextualization engine across the whole platform, and instead of it just being called the Cooker Cloud, we're about to rebrand it as the Artisan Intelligence System, or the AI system. We're going to call it ARTIS for short, because the system provides you that automatic context, so that at a glance, hey, you're doing better, you're doing worse, your productivity is going up, it's going down, and to be able to drill in and see why without hiring a team of data analysts to parse through your data for months on end and give you a limited insight to what's really going on. So it's tremendous savings. What does it do? It reduces your startup timeline. It allows you to incrementally improve the output of your equipment, increase your product quality. It's just a win all around.
One thing that stuck out was right at the start. You mentioned how you tailored it to the food industry, because you're right. Like, none of this is anything unique. Like, anyone can do this, but you've tailored it to your business. How do you recommend other leaders, because I'm sure there's some people in the food industry, but I'm sure there are people across a bunch of industries listening to this. How do you prioritize what you're measuring to make sure you're giving your customers the best information rather than just a data dump?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting problems I think that the end user of the technology has is that is the lack of that contextualization. So you can take a machine from supplier A, and then you can come and get a historian from supplier B, and you can bolt that historian system onto it, and you get a steady stream of data. And that's not useless, but it's not as powerful as contextualized data can be, just because you have this stream of consciousness coming out. And I guess you can use machine learning type activities to try to predict variables that are interacting. And I know that people do that, but you can do better than that. And it's very simple. All you really need to do is say, as you find the problem solvers in your business. So you talk to your service team, you talk to your applications experts or your usage experts, and you say, what do you do that has a pattern? And you find the patterns in the thought processes of your problem solvers. And so what information do you consistently need? How do you need it served up? And what do you look for to determine what kind of problem exists? And then you say, what kind of sensors do I need on there? And how would I architect the control system to deliver me those insights? In my case, I spent years flying out to customers with a stopwatch and a temperature probe because I was all about cooking food. And, they'd say, hey, I need to cook more food, Dan. And I'd say, great, I'm going to get on an airplane. And I'd grab my temperature probe and my stopwatch and then my notebook, and I'd go there and I'd start measuring. And then I'd look at the measurements and I'd circle the ones where there's opportunities. And I said, we could do something here, here, and here. Well, if I can do that with a couple basic measurements, you can automate it. And if you can automate it, you can have consistently created, a steady stream of accurate data. And you can take it to the nth degree of complexity, however far you want. But starting basic, doing something that has a general impact. I mean, what do businesses care about? They either want to make more or they want to make more on the product, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. It's increased production, it's lower costs, it's increased safety, it's increased quality. There's not a lot of asks. They're pretty basic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those don't change too much. And that's what you're doing for your customers with this solution. I'm interested to know and this is the last question on this initiative before we move to the third one. What has this done for your business? Because I know now you can do more remote commissioning, remote startups. That's, a trend across the industry, but how have you seen that impact your business? Are you able to do more work this way? Fill me in on that.
Well, I'm so proud of how that technology came in to benefit our customers and our team. So I'm just super pumped that you're asking me that. We going into this, we had a backlog of projects. Many of them were international. We got some orders in the middle of it too that were international. So, all of a sudden our team needs to figure out how to start up equipment in Europe and Southeast Asia at the same time when borders aren't necessarily open, or you have to go in and out of quarantine zones to get into various countries. So what does that practically mean? I mean, we could have people sitting in a hotel room for 2 weeks on either side before they're allowed to go into the plant or come back. You can imagine the impact that has when you've got a highly technical person who's capable of really impactful work hanging out in a quarantine hotel in Southeast Asia. So what do? You send one individual out with a connected team to back them up. That way you've got the combination of eyes and ears on the ground and the contextualized data to help them troubleshoot, problem solve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what did it allow us to do? We were helping food factories spin up and get running across the globe through a pandemic. And I just think that that's just tremendous. I don't know that you need a bigger example of impact than that. But at the same time, a lot of these folks had multiple plants. They can also see what's happening at their plants without traveling themselves. and do that kind of stay close even at a distance thing. So
I love that line keeps coming through. It's a great tagline. I think our whole audience will remember that by the time this wraps. And as we get to the final throes of the interview, I'm sure something that's on people's minds is your third initiative around that hybrid work model, because we were just talking about it in the last example, like you still had boots on the ground even when you were doing a lot of work remotely, having that team to back up that individual. So how does a hybrid work model work in manufacturing, something that's very much a physical industry?
Right. Well, it doesn't work in every job, right? So like I said, welding, you still have to be there to weld. And I mean, will that change someday? I don't know, maybe, but that's not really the subject of this. I'll call you for a third or fourth visit when that
Sounds
happens,
good.
and we can talk about that then. How does it work in practice? I mean, I know not everybody's going to see me on video. In fact, most people won't see me on video, but for those that do, what you're looking at here, this used to be my office. And Chris, you'll notice that there is a workstation behind me.
Yep.
We don't have offices anymore, including the CEO. None of us do. My office is my backpack. My backpack is on my back. It's wherever I am. So we reduced the number of spaces we had locally, so there wasn't as much office space. Every workstation is designed with an approximate configuration, and when folks need higher power computing, we have a bank of higher powered computers that are lined up in a closet that they can remote into, so you can still use the high power computer with a flexible workstation, so you can move around. So not everybody has to carry around a high powered tower to do simulation work or high end modeling work. And it's pretty much as simple as some work is better asynchronously, some work is better collaboratively, and you can pretty much break it down to work that is repeatable. Honestly speaking, it's better asynchronously. You can go where you're comfortable. You can sit down and power through that work and get it done. But work that is a complex, multivariate problem or an interdepartmental problem, that requires collaboration. And so what you do is you identify when you have that kind of problem, and you come together. An example of how that's employed within our company is, we use Salesforce, so they've got the chatter feature. Let's say you're working on a project and you hit a dead stop. You've got some kind of an interdepartmental technical problem. Maybe you need two engineers to come together, two different types of engineers to come together, or two folks have differing opinions about how the design could need to be executed. And these things happen everywhere. We created the digital equivalent of the Toyota Ondan cord. You can go in and do a hashtag cord in the chatter, and tag an executive to say, hey man, we're stuck. And the company policy is one of the leaders has to respond to a hashtag cord within a fixed period of time, convene them, and support the creative problem solving of it. Now you can set up a virtual meeting and try to solve it there. But if that doesn't work because you need more data or insight, or you need more collaboration, then you maybe pull them back into the office. You say, okay, I'm gonna need you guys to come in for a few hours. Let's meet this afternoon. Let's meet tomorrow. We'll game this out. Hey man, I'll get donuts on the way. So we can, keep our blood sugar up while we're solving that problem. We do the same for collaborative pre-checks. Let's say we're designing something new and we want to get the downstream department to look at it. We can do a hashtag manufacturing check on a design and say, hey guys, we need you to look at this, before the normal release process or design review. And I'm doing air quotes for the people that aren't listening, but before that, before those processes, so that you can use your technologies. It's using those technologies to create, as a trigger, to create the collaboration you need to solve the specific problem, and understanding that some work is best remote, some work is inherently collaborative. Understand the difference. And I think that's a critical component to being successful on that front.
I love that. What's been the quickest way you've learned what's better in person and what's better or what can be done remote? How have you learned those lessons? Because I'm sure some things that you might guess could have gone one way have gone the other. Is that right in saying?
Yeah, well, so when the lockdowns first began, I would tell you it looked like our outputs were going up everywhere. And at first we were thinking, oh man, remote work is just better. And so we were kind of hyperbolizing, we were like, oh, it's just better. And then certain activities began to get slower while others got faster. Yeah. And then we thought, oh, so not all of it is better. Some of it does require a different type of collaboration. And we had Zoom meetings, we had Google Hangouts, and we had chat, rooms and all that kind of stuff was all there. But sometimes the problems are so complex, they require the nuance of communication. How did we define them? Frankly speaking, we started seeing what types of things what types of things tended to get stuck or needed to have that cord pulled on them. So you track when the cord's getting pulled and you say, man, there's a pattern here. And the factors that predicate this occurring are X, Y, and Z. So let's restructure the work to be a little more predictive about what we need to do and when we need to be there and where we need to be, and still have that flexibility. So again, no one's got an office here, so they are wherever they are, whenever they are, and as long as we're hitting the output, it's okay.
How have you enjoyed not having an office? How have you personally enjoyed the move? I've got some of my own thoughts on it, or a story I'll share after this, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was odd for me too, because I had my little kind of, I had my pictures of my kids on the wall, and and I took it all down and I put it in a box at home, and I thought, this is strange. So how am I personally adapting to it? I mean, I think at first it felt a little weird, but one of the things that I think I'm seeing overall, and it applies to me too, is, you never know who's going to sit at that desk behind me. And sometimes I'll go down and sit in an area that I don't always sit, in a different region. So you try not to, I do camp at this desk a little more than I should, but but people, are sitting next to each other. So I might be in a room one day and I'll see somebody from service sitting next to somebody from accounting. And then, a conversation strikes up. 2 years ago, they weren't talking. I mean, you have lunchroom conversations, and it's how are you? What'd you do for vacation? But what was happening here is it would kind of swivel and say, since you're here, I've always had this problem. How does that affect you? And they would say, you didn't know about this thing, or you didn't, and then, no, I didn't know about that. And so I'm walking along and watching like connections being made that wouldn't have been made. And I don't see how that could have anything but a positive outcome, because when information is shared, it's just a natural course of that learning creates growth.
I love it. Now, after the interview's done, I'm going to text you a picture of my new mobile office as well, because one of my goals with the pandemic was I want to be able to work remotely as well. I've got a really nice home office back in Milwaukee now, but I mean, I've got it down to a science. I've got a 20-inch external monitor that comes apart that fits in my carry-on on the plane. Cool. So I can deck out a pretty good productive setup regardless of where I am in the world. So
you got me beat. I am not like that. I've got like a speaker and a camera and a laptop.
Sure.
So I'm not that about
it took a little tweaking, but the external monitor in the carry-on was the final icing on the cake. It's like, because they've got like external monitors that are like, I don't know, 12, 15 inches, but they're not the same as having like a nice robust dual monitor. So anyway, that's kind of related to it, but we're in the final throes of the conversation. I knew we were going to get up against the wire with our discussion, because we always have good conversations. But as we've gone through your 3 initiatives. Before we wrap, is there anything you wish I would have asked you about these that hasn't come up yet?
Oh man. I don't know if I've got anything I wish you would have asked me about these. No, I really do feel like I've been able to answer the questions. Is there something you wanted to ask which you haven't asked?
No, I think there probably is. Well, I've got one. One other thing you mentioned to me is that, you've been doing more article writing about what you're doing. You're doing a lot of thought leadership. And I feel like that's really this is different from everything else we're talking, but that's a really underutilized skill or opportunity that manufacturers have, I should say, where it's like, hey, if you talk about the things you're doing in industry magazines, like that's exposure for your company right there. I'm interested to hear maybe a little bit about what you've been doing there and how it's been working for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I guess you're talking about some of the articles I wrote for magazines like the Food Technology magazine. Thanks for allowing me to toot my own horn when I was unwilling to do so, or I had forgotten that I had it.
Sure.
Yeah, I did sit down and write numerous articles for to help industry understand ways that they can adapt to social distancing in the manufacturing floor, how they can use technology or how they can use processes or collaboration procedures. We actually did that in the first couple months of the pandemic. I was writing those back in April, May, June of last year is when I was really, really firing up on that. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I didn't do it directly because of the corporation, but I did it because of our company purpose. You stated our purpose at the start, but our organization, I mean, yeah, we're a for-profit business and we're a manufacturer, and that's what we're here to do. But also at the core of it is what we're passionate about is the food industry. We think it's amazing that we get the opportunity to feed people. We think it's just you forget how amazing it is that you can go down the street to a supermarket and you can take for granted that you can have anything you want almost. And it's fresh and safe and nutritious, and the amount of work that goes into that, it's not small. So I'm really proud to be a part of that industry, and what I wanted to make sure that we could do as an organization is share whatever insights we have to benefit the industry as a whole. And so do I think it translates out into X units sold? I honestly I don't know or care. But do I think a few hundred or a few thousand people read it and said, hey, maybe I could adopt a couple of those ideas and I can keep my employees safe, or I can keep my customers safe. I mean, that's really all that matters, to be honest with you. And at the end of the day, if we're part of that, there's plenty of business in the world for all of us.
Well, I know you're passionate about food, making great food. That comes across in every conversation. It also reminded me of our last interview where I didn't know what bird's eye frozen food was. And I will have you know, every time I go to the grocery store, that stuff like pops out at me now. I can't miss it now. I don't know how I was so unobservant. By the way, I got a lot of comments on that. It's like, Chris, how do you not know what bird's eye, that was the number one tweet that came after that interview. It's like, how do you not know what bird's eye is? Everyone knows what it is. So anyway, that's a little bit of an aside to say, I know you're very passionate about all the food that you make. And
well, can I give you one more fact about frozen food then, since we're on the frozen food? All right.
Please do.
You should know that it is very common that frozen foods actually have a higher nutrient density. There's more nutrients, more vitamins and things in the frozen food than there is in the fresh food. Not always, but usually, because they're picked when they're fresh and they're frozen. And even though the processing process reduces some of the vitamins, they're picked at their peak. And some of the other things you get in the store, especially if it's off season, they're not picked at their peak. So sometimes, I know a lot of people say stay around the outside of the aisle. I get it. Yeah. There's some good stuff in the middle there too, guys.
Yeah. So. No, you've hyped up the food before. Just because it's frozen doesn't mean it's lower quality. In fact, like you're saying, could be better. So I as someone that travels a lot, I always have frozen vegetables in the freezer. It just makes my life easier, so I don't have things going bad. So as we finish this up, what's next for Blentech? Final question.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we're going to stay the course on what we're at, what we're focusing on. These initiatives, I mean, they're not going to be done per se. So for us, we're finding ways to scale that production. We're definitely seeing huge increases in demand, and we know that as we build out this system, we're going to be able to keep those lead times low to try to deliver on that demand and deploy as much of this technology as we can. Again, to benefit the industry as well as our organization. So honestly, it's stay the course for a little while because we did some big changes, and it's time to make sure that they're done as well as they can be, which is going to take some time.
Awesome. Well, stay the course. You're always doing new and cool things there. It's always great catching up with you, Dan. For those listening, manufacturinghappyhour.com. You can catch every resource we mentioned in this episode. You can see how to connect with Blentech and Dan. And with that, really appreciate you jumping on the show, Dan.
You bet. Thanks.
Cheers, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. And a big thanks to Dan for jumping on the show. Always great having conversations with him. I've mentioned it before, but he is one of the people in my career that I'm always learning something new from. So a pleasure to have him share some of his knowledge with you as well through this podcast. If you want to access any of the resources mentioned in this episode or learn more about Blentech or check out that book, The Power of Habit, I highly recommend it as well. You can find all resources and links over at manufacturinghappyhour.com/59. That's the show notes page for this episode. Before we wrap, a couple other announcements. I want to let you know that if you want to be part of conversations like this in a virtual setting, make sure to check out our industry community over on LinkedIn. It's a group of almost 500 manufacturing leaders that regularly have conversations around pressing topics like this in our industry. So make sure you head there by going to manufacturinghappyhour.com/community. It'll take you straight to our page. I also want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is the resource for e-commerce solutions for the B2B world. So if you're a dealer, if you're a distributor, if you are an equipment manufacturer and you want to make it easy for your customers to order the right parts when they need them, Gen Alpha is a fantastic solution for you. Make sure to check out our interview with their COO, Christina Harrington, back in episode 34, and learn more about them by going to manufacturinghappyhour.com/Gen Alpha. And with that, that's it for this week. More interviews coming right up. In the meantime, stay innovative, stay thirsty. Catch you back here real soon. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Manufacturing Happy Hour, powered by the Industrial Network.